Okay, hi, I'm Faith McInerney, and we're on Vesta Chiron. We're doing a series on Chiron and the four major asteroids, and today we're going to talk about Vesta Chiron. So let's talk a little bit about what Vesta means, because I think we're all familiar with Chiron, but for our purposes, I've done a lot of looking at Vesta and a lot of looking at Chiron, and this is what I've come up with. That Vesta is whatever the mythical implications of Vesta are, notwithstanding, that when you're looking at event-oriented astrology, Vesta is a location. It can be a room, a home, a building, piece of land, a country or a container. Even a lockbox is a Vesta entity. When you see Vesta in aspect to Chiron, you see issues of location and health combined. Locations for healing, like hospitals, clinics, spas. Even fitting your home for a sick occupant is a Vesta Chiron event. Interestingly, it's often in the charts of nurses and hospital workers, but not in the charts of physicians. Now, the other manifestation of Vesta and Chiron are health issues and dangers that arise from home conditions like mold. Another picture for a lot of the same is Neptune Vesta, very common picture for hospitals and rehabs. And those moldy pictures of the moldy homes will also show up with afflictions of 4 and 6. For a problem with the environment in the home, health problem coming from the environment. Now, we're going to get technical for 1 minute. We're really here to talk about delineations, but reading aspects is a two-step process, and you need to understand the meaning of it, and you need to be able to identify that aspect as frequently as possible when it occurs, when it's in there. There are many ways to see occurrences of planetary contacts. Some are traditional and some of them are not so traditional. So to maximize the likelihood that I'm going to see as many aspects as I possibly can, I use traditional and non-traditional. You don't have to. That's the way we're going to go for the next 5 minutes, but really you can take all of this information home with you, use these delineations for Vesta Chiron, and you'll be good. So they're not essential to your understanding. You'll understand just as much about Vesta Chiron without understanding the techniques, but 2 slides, here they are. So we're going to be looking at one aspect in 4 different formats. This is a person with Vesta Chiron that you cannot see in his natal chart. You can see that he's got a Sun-Chiron conjunction, but you cannot see that it's an aspect to Vesta. And so when you put him on one kind of dial, you'll see it this way. In this dial, it's a 90-degree dial, and the aspects fall on the arrows. And so we can see that he's got Sun Vesta Chiron. On this side of the arrow, he's got Sun Chiron. On this side of the arrow, he's got Vesta. But I prefer this dial. It's the 22.5-degree dial. It shows all 16 occurrences of every major hard aspect, and it shows them like a conjunction. So we see, in this chart, we can't see it at all. In this chart, we see it. And in this chart, in my opinion, we see it in the most crisp and it's a shortcut. We see it in its most pared down version. Now, the sort will give us the same information, but in linear form, linear order. And you can see the orb. We can see that he's got the Chiron, Vesta, and Sun are all within 15 minutes of each other. And that's the value of the sort. That not only can you see the aspect, but you can see the orb. And as you can imagine, that's super useful for progressions and for solar arcs. Now let's take 1 minute and talk about midpoints, which are exactly like any other aspect in that they blend the meaning of planets. Midpoints are only complicated when you're looking at a lot of them. And I agree, when you're looking at a lot of them, they're dizzying. But today we're only going to be looking at the Sun. This is what the Sun on Chiron Vesta looks like. And we see here that this person has the Sun 3 minutes from the Chiron Vesta midpoint. We're also going to be looking at the Aries point. All you have to remember today is that the Aries point is as important as the sun. So any aspects to the Aries point, any midpoints to the Aries point are as emphasized as if it was the sun. And so here in this person's chart, they had Aries on the Chiron Vesta midpoint, 2 minutes orb. Now, so this is it. We're done with the alternative aspects. All you need to remember is that the numbers will always line up and the delineations are identical to traditional aspects. Here we go. So we were talking about hospitals and people being connected with hospitals and rehabs with Ceres Chiron. So Mother Teresa, when she opened her first hospice, first of all, did she have Ceres? Yeah, she had Mars on the Ceres Chiron midpoint. Would I have brought her up here for that? No. The reason I brought her up here was that when she started her first hospice, the progressed node was 1 minute from the Ceres Chiron. That spoke to me. Mother Cabrini, who founded, I live on that street where there's a Cabrini hospital. She had a Vesta Chiron. Betty Ford, I mean, she'll be remembered for more than one thing, but the clinic is really, you know, when you say you've been to Betty Ford, that's where you've been. So she had the ascendant on the Chiron Vesta midpoint. And when she went into rehab, here was her solar return. She had Vesta Chiron, and she also had Neptune Chiron. We talked about that a minute ago, that it is similar in meaning to Vesta Chiron. When Clapton opened a rehab, it showed up in his solar return also as a Chiron Vesta opposition. Florence Nightingale, whose statue is in the front of many hospitals, had Sun equals Chiron Vesta, 39 minutes orb. I'm not sure about this Mayo Clinic guy. You know, I mean, it's a very wide orb. It's a 4 degree orb. And as you can see in our world, 4 degrees is an awfully wide orb, but I can't ignore it. It's a 4 degree conjunction and he's Mayo of the Mayo Clinic. Hard to ignore that. Now this is a very interesting manifestation. Here's Bill Clinton. Here's his natal chart. That's what a declination looks like. He's got natal Vesta Chiron. Jupiter's there also, but we're just going to be looking at that Vesta Chiron. When he moved to Hot Springs, Arkansas, he had this Vesta Chiron came exact by progression. And it turns out that Hot Springs, Arkansas is a gathering place for Indians for healing. Now, let's look, I know, I misspoke. I said we're only going to be looking at the sun in Aries. Well, here, let's look at the moon. Because in these people's instances, it was one's mother and one's wife. That was their Vesta Chiron experience. So Eric Fromm was a super famous psychiatrist. I think he was a psychologist. I don't think he was a psychiatrist. His first wife ran a clinic for brain injuries, opened the sanitarium where they worked together. After they divorced, he got her a job at a U.S. clinic. She was the psychiatrist. She was the psychiatrist in I Never Promised You a Rose Garden. That was Eric Fromm's wife. At any rate, that's the moon equals Ceres Chiron. The moon equals Vesta Chiron is this wife who ran a clinic, opened a sanitarium, and he got her a job at another clinic. Now, here's another example of Allen Ginsberg. He had the moon equals Vesta Chiron, and his mother was a regular habitué, was a regular patient of mental hospitals. Now, with a chart like Ginsberg's, where the moon was precisely on that Vesta Chiron, when Saturn triggered his moon, it triggered his Vesta Chiron. So it was likely that she was going to have to go somewhere to get better. So one of her stays was triggered by Saturn, meaning he had transiting Saturn to his moon. That would have been enough, actually. But it happened to trigger his Chiron Vesta. She had her longest hospitalization, and progressed Vesta was 4 minutes from the midpoint, from the Chiron Vesta midpoint. So that's the moon equals Vesta Chiron, where the woman in your life can be connected with starting hospitals or can be somebody who's needed hospitalization. The other meanings of Vesta Chiron are foster care and orphanage, a location with very few amenities, living off the grid, an unhealthy location, for example, like the moldy apartment, bleak or deteriorating conditions, including ruins and graves and dumps, refugee camps, exiles, displaced persons, captivity, exploited countries, what we call third world and underdeveloped. The wrong use of land, let's say when you are trying to farm land that's not hospitable to farming. And healing the location, saving, restoring, improving homes and buildings and sites. Similar manifestations, not so much for the restoration, but for the underdeveloped and the ruins, is Vesta Hades. So let's talk about orphanages and Vesta Chiron. So Madonna has the Sun and Venus on the natal Vesta Chiron midpoint. And her adoptions triggered that picture. She adopted a son with transiting Chiron stationing on her Vesta, 13 minutes from her Vesta. When she adopted her youngest child, the moon with solar arc Chiron Vesta. But when progressed Vesta came to aspect natal Chiron, the major event was the launch of a clothing line. Now, there's either something we don't know about her life at that time, or WTF, it corresponded with the launch of a clothing line. Back to the orphans. So Marilyn Monroe went into foster care when she was 12 days old. And actually, that would have put the sun at about 258 in terms of progression. So the sun was 2 minutes from being exact with Chiron Vesta. Natally, she had a 4-minute orb. When Freddie Mercury was shipped off to school, his natal declination became exact by progression. When Elian Gonzalez, I've stripped this chart of everything but what we need. So this was a kid who came from Cuba on a raft, came on a raft with his mother. His mother died on the trip, and he came here alone. And when he came, the progressed moon was triggering. He had the natal opposition, and it was triggered by the progressed moon. I think it was triggered by Chiron as well, if I'm not mistaken. Prince William had the natal square, has the natal square and a declination of Vesta Chiron. When the declination was exact, Diana died and he moved. When Prince Harry had the same event, progressed Saturn was on his, no, here we're looking at William. He's got the square. Harry, we don't have his stuff up here, but you'll take my word for it, that progressed Saturn was at the midpoint of Vesta Chiron. And it doesn't really have to do with them becoming orphans so much as leaving their home. Yes, they were orphaned, lost their mother, but it was the part where they had to leave their home as a result of it. Now, Vesta Chiron is also locations that have few amenities. Here was the cabin of the Unabomber, and that was a low amenity cabin. Countries that were exploited for their resources. I mean, we can actually put this in the category of abused land. This actually, we could talk about why exploited countries are Vesta Chiron, but we'll continue for the moment. So Cecil Rhodes, Rhodesia, George III, you know, that's why we rebelled against George III for exploiting country, and Queen Victoria. We talked about her in another. She's also, I mean, the British Empire expanded so much under Queen Victoria and all of what that meant. So this was the worst of the worst colonialist, Salazar. He was from Portugal, and Angola was the colony. I'm going to let you read about why he's the worst of the worst, but at any rate, he is another Vesta Chiron person. Now, Vesta Chiron also has to do not only with exploited land and disrepair, but abused or inhospitable land. So Mao and Mussolini both had Vesta Chiron. Actually, Mao had it with Ceres, which, you know, accounted for the food part of it. Anyway, in Mao's chart, the farming practices led to starvation. In Mussolini's chart, it led to a financial crisis. But in both instances, they were abusing the land. The land was not really created to extract what they were trying to get out of it by farming. Now, this was interesting. So when progressed Chiron hit Ceres, that's when all of these people starved. We see the whole picture of Ceres, Chiron, Vesta, and the inhospitable land and abusing it. That was one period of his life. When Pluto triggered his natal Ceres, Chiron, Vesta, the tomb of Confucius was desecrated by the Red Guard. And so we talked about that before. We talked about tombs and graveyards also having a Vesta Chiron quality. But here it was the fact that it was desecrated. It was ruined. The location was ruined. So typical situations where you'll see Vesta Chiron in your life, in my life, these are ordinary Vesta Chiron situations. Here's a person who was born with the natal picture, born with the natal conjunction, Vesta Chiron conjunction. I've done some work on this chart, so I know it's on the Saturn-Uranus midpoint, and we know that that is an antagonistic picture. So he had mold so severe that it led to a lawsuit. Years and years of lawsuits, and that was his manifestation of Vesta Chiron. It could have been symbolized by an affliction between 4 and 6. I've got another client with Saturn in the 4th, squaring Scorpio planets in the 6th. She had the same problem where there was mold in her apartment and she had an allergy and she lived with it for years. You even see it in royal residences. This is not, you know, we talked about being off the grid and no amenities, and that's true. That's a Vesta Chiron location. But even in any kind of ruined location, even among royal ruined locations, you'll see Vesta Chiron, and that's how we see it here. When Prince Charles' grandmother died, he inherited her home. He had Vesta equals, progressed Vesta equal Chiron. He had to put millions into renovating this home. And the quote about it was that even in the 80s, he inherited it in 2003, but even in the 80s, it was threadbare. Dog bowls everywhere, and you could put your hand through the curtain. And so that was a royal residence, a Vesta Chiron residence. And I don't know if we can see the bottom of this slide, but here's her, we can't. Her chart, the Queen Mum's chart, she had Aries on the Chiron Vesta midpoint. So you see it in the best of homes. Here's Jeff Bridges. We looked at him for our example of how the aspect works on a dial and a sort. So here we have his natal picture of Sun Vesta Chiron. When he had his 45 solar arc, you know, your chart sort of goes off when you're 22 and a half and 45. And here was his 45 solar arc, and it triggered, here was the progressed sun, triggering that natal picture. Now, that was an earthquake, ruined his house. When he had earthquake, more earthquake, this solar return had Chiron opposite Vesta. And when he had mudslide, the solar return had a Vesta Chiron picture that we can't see on the chart. No, but we can see it on the dial. Looks like a conjunction. So there we have Vesta Chiron and homes that were destroyed and rebuilt. Here's Thomas Edison, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson had two issues. He had natal Vesta Chiron, and he had two issues over the course of his life that illustrated his Vesta Chiron. His house was destroyed by a fire, and he signed the contract for Washington, D.C. We'll talk about that in a minute. So first of all, here's the natal chart. We don't know his ascendant. Maybe he's Aquarius rising. I wouldn't rule it out. I wouldn't rule it out. You know, sometimes when I read about him, I think Capricorn rising, but I certainly wouldn't rule this out. At any rate, he had the Sun and Pluto at the midpoint of Chiron Vesta, 13 minutes orb, with no greater than 13 minutes orb, let's put it that way. And his home was destroyed by a fire in the I think it was 1771 or something like that. So transiting Chiron was conjunct natal Vesta. This is a home destroyed by a fire. Transiting Chiron was conjunct natal Vesta, and his library was burned. Thousands of books were burned in this fire. And the other thing he had was Mercury, progressed Mercury, at the midpoint of Chiron Vesta. Hey, Mercury on Mercury Mars, that's kind of compelling too for the books that burned. And Mercury on Chiron Vesta. I guess I have Washington on the next slide. Yes. Okay. Oh my God, I have so many. Here we go. Here's the what I was looking for. So Jefferson brokered the deal for Washington, D.C. to become the nation's capital, the U.S. capital. And when he signed the contract, progressed Chiron was 2 minutes from natal Vesta. So, you know, it turns out that Washington is on a swamp. That's why when people go there, they get mosquito bites, because it is a swamp. So he signed the contract with Chiron Vesta. He brokered the deal with progressed Chiron to Vesta, 2 minutes. And what happened was that 10 years later, nothing was finished because it became a blight. They needed to build canal. It was, you know, all on a swamp. They needed to build canals before they could do anything else. It took 10 years to get that infrastructure together. And that's what happened when he brokered a deal for property on a Vesta Chiron progression. We're always telling these people, hey, you know, talk to an astrologer. Here's another Vesta Chiron situation. J.C. Dugard, she was born in captivity. Oh no, her two daughters were born in captivity. What am I saying? This is what captivity looks like. This is a home with non-amenities. And these were the charts of the two daughters. One of her daughters had Sun equals Vesta Chiron. In fact, both of the daughters had Sun equals Vesta Chiron, and this is where they lived. This is our last slide. Van Gogh had Vesta Chiron and progressed Chiron stationed, and it was never more than 6 minutes from his natal Vesta Chiron midpoint. And this is what happened. This was his early work. He painted bleak locales. His masterpieces were painted while he was in a hospital. He painted the hospital. Starry Night, his big masterpiece, was painted from a hospital room with barred windows. So you kind of have to imagine that he was seeing this through the bars of a hospital window. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you'd like to contact me, I'm at astrofaith@AOL, And if you'd like to learn more about midpoints, I've got a blog. Have I got midpoints for you? midpointobservatory.blogspot.com, and join us for the next video on Hollis Chiron. Thanks. Bye.